Hello class, welcome to a tutorial for MGQ 201 on how to use the frequency function as well as the Countif function. These functions are a really important part of chapter 2. They're going to save you guys a lot of time on both the quiz as well as on the midterm in the future, and so it's a good idea to practice these two formulas and to really know how to use them. Here you'll see I have a setup that looks like a homework question. I have basically all this data right here, and then I've had my bin set up, and then a lot of the questions are going to ask you to find the frequency, relative frequency, and cumulative relative frequency. To start, we always need to find frequency. Frequency, again, is just counting how many times each of your bins appears in the set of data. Frequency is an array function, which just means we have to do a couple things differently than we normally would. The first thing that we have to do when we use the frequency function is to highlight all of the cells we want to do at once. Here you can see I want to fill out how many times 1 appears, how many times 2 appears, and so forth. So I've highlighted these 5 cells. Next, I'll begin it like any other function in Excel with an equal sign. I'll start to type in equals frequency. You'll see that this will pop up. I'll double click this. Excel will always ask us what we want inside of our function. Here you can see it's starting to ask for the data array. So I'm going to highlight all of my data. Comma. Now it's asking for the bins array, so I want to highlight all of my bins. Those are the only two things that the frequency function needs. Now I want to close my parenthesis. Now one of the most commonly missed mistakes of using the frequency function would be just hitting enter right now. However, because this is an array function, we have to hold Control Shift while hitting enter. Don't just press Control Shift and then press enter. We want to hold down Control Shift, hit enter, and you'll see all of these frequencies are suddenly filled in. Here we can see that 1 appears in the data 5 times, 2 appears in the data 5 times, 3 appears 7 times, and so forth. That will always be right, and again, knowing how to do that will save you a lot of time versus trying to count it or whatever other methods there are. Up next, we want to find relative frequency. Relative frequency is exactly what it sounds like. It's how many times each of your bin values appears relative to the entire set. To do that, all we have to do is take each frequency value and divide it by the total. So first we need a total number of data points. To do that, all we have to do is add up all of the frequency values. That's how many total numbers there are in our set. To do that, I'm going to use another Excel function, equals sum. As the course goes on, we'll start to use more and more Excel functions. Equals sum is a common one. It just adds up everything you put inside the parentheses. So you see I have 24 pieces of data. This means I'm going to divide each of the frequency values by 24. One of the nice reasons we use Excel is because it's really good at picking up patterns and using relative formulas, and so that's what I'm going to use in this case. I wanted to divide each of these frequencies by 24, so I'm going to click in this cell. It's going to do 5 divided by now 24. Now one of the key aspects to remember is that we wanted to divide by each of these values, but we wanted to divide by 24 all of the time. So I'm going to make that 24 absolute. To make anything absolute, you just put $signs in front of the letter and the number, and now it's always going to divide by this cell right here. If I hit enter, you'll see my relative frequency comes up. Because I've set up the formula like this, I can now go and grab this little black cross in the bottom right corner and drag it down 5 spots. You'll see now that it's calculated the relative frequency for each of my bins, which is what I need for the homework. You'll also see here that it's gone out a lot of decimal places. You can change that by just clicking up here or right-clicking Format. For this question on the homework, it wants 3, so this is what I'll leave it at. Always remember with my stat lab to just be aware of what it's asking for in terms of its decimal places. Lastly, for this question, we're going to find cumulative relative frequency. This one is just based on relative frequency, where it adds up each subsequent value. The first cumulative relative frequency is always equal to the first relative frequency, so I'm just going to do equals that cell. Next, we wanted to take the value of the chances of 1 appearing and then add it to the chances of 2 appearing. So I'm going to add it to the cell below it and then add it to the relative frequency of 2. What this is saying now is that the chances of getting a 1 or a 2 in this set of data is 0.417. I now want to keep adding up these formulas. So I want to add the chances of 1 or 2 appearing to the chances of 3 appearing, which is now 0.078. And as you can kind of see, I've set it up with relative formulas, so I can just drag this down. And I will have all of my cumulative relative frequency. One quick way to check is that the last value of the cumulative relative frequency should always be 1. That just means that all of the possible values are taken care of. The chances of getting a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is 100%, which makes sense because there's only 1, 2, 3, 4s, and 5s in my data set. Knowing this process will help you guys greatly going forward. So again, just make sure you practice this a couple times before you go to take the quiz and then eventually the midterm. That's the frequency function. Frequency is used when we have numbers. Unfortunately, we can't use the frequency function when we have qualitative data. So in this case, I have a data set that looks at classes, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. And so I have to use a different function. This function I'm going to use is going to be Countif. So when I start this question, I'm going to do equals Countif. Again, you'll see this one will pop up. Excel will always ask what it's looking for. In this case, it's looking for the range, which is just another way to put our data set. So I want to highlight all of my data. Comma. And now it's going to look for criteria. In this case, I'm not looking for numbers. I want it to count how many times FR appears. And so I'm going to type in FR. One of the only key things to remember here is that when we type in letters, we just have to put it in quotes. So I'm going to type quote, FR, close quote, close parenthesis, and hit enter. When I hit enter, it's going to search this data set over here and count how many times it sees FR, which is exactly what we want it to do. And it sees it 11 times. To complete the rest of this question, I'm simply going to do each of these Countifs again. The data set stays the same. The only thing that's going to change is now obviously the criteria. Instead of typing in quote FR, I'm going to type in quote SO, close quote, close parenthesis, and now it's going to search for all of the sophomores in my data set. The last two will be the same, except obviously now we're going to search for JR and SR. So, in closing, just remember when you use the frequency function that it's an array function. You have to highlight all of the boxes at once, and then at the end, hold Control Shift Enter. We use frequency whenever we have quantitative data. Countif is the function we're going to use when we want frequency for qualitative data. Knowing those differences will help you a lot. This has been a tutorial, and hopefully a lot of you guys find this helpful. Thank you.